Hi everyone, in today's video I am going to show you how to set up Active Directory with DNS in Windows Server 2019. My name is Ashish and this channel is all about showing you how to become a highly paid IT professional. That too fast. Let's get started. Alright, so what I have is the Windows Server 2019 which is named as Ohio DC1. And this is currently part of the work group, which means that it is not part of any kind of domain. And we are going to be setting up domain here. But before we do that, let's just quickly verify its IP configuration. Let's see what kind of IP address it has and what the DNS is. And then once we set up our own DNS server with Active Directory here, we will go back and change the DNS server on this particular server. So all I need to do is ipconfig/all, and now what it says is the IP address here is 192.168.10.100 and the subnet mask is 255.255.255.0, and then it has got a default gateway which is 10.1, and that is what it is all about. And the DNS server is 192.168.1.1, which is basically taking up the DNS server from the virtual box in which I'm running the virtual machine, which is this particular Ohio-DC1 server. So let's get started. Now, there are two ways you can start the installation. Either you can go to the Manage menu and select Add Roles and Features, or you can go to the dashboard and click on this particular option, which is Add Roles and Features. So we will just go ahead and click on this particular option. Now Add Roles and Features wizard begins. So this is before you begin page. It gives you the basic idea of what needs to happen, and then click Next. Then you come to the select installation type. So by default, role-based or feature-based installation is selected. So we are going to keep this option and click Next. Now, this is the server on which I'm going to install Ohio. This is the server on which I'm going to install the Active Directory, which is Ohio-DC1. Ohio-DC1. And now, because if there were more servers in this particular pool, then obviously there will be more options. But since this is the only server, so this is the default selection. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And then I come to the select server role. So here what I need to do is I need to select Active Directory domain services. Now the moment I do this, this particular dialog box pops up. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on this Add Features. And the next thing I need to do is select the DNS server. And again another dialog box pops up. So I just keep the default options and click on Add Features. And there you go. So both these options are selected. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Next. I'm going to keep the default options as is. So no more features to be selected. And then it comes to the Active Directory domain services. So basically it also tells you a little bit about the Azure Active Directory. So we don't need to perform anything about any kind of configuration on this particular step. So we just go ahead, click Next. Then it tells you it gives you the information about the DNS server. So we just go ahead and click Next. And then we come to a screen where it says Confirm Installation Selection. So I just go ahead and click on Install. So the installation will now start. It will take a few minutes. Now there are several tools that are going to get installed. So there is the remote server administration tools, and then there are tools which are related to Active Directory services and Active Directory lightweight directory services tools. Then there are different other tools like Administrative Center, and then Active Directory snap-ins and command line tools, and then there are DNS specific tools. And you also get the group policy management. Now, when you have a standalone server or a server that is part of the domain, but it is not a domain controller. Now, if you ask what domain controller is the one that is going to run the Active Directory. So once we install Active Directory on Ohio-DC1, it will become the domain controller. That is the reason I've named it as DC1. Now, once this is installed, there will be a new snap-in that will get added into the tools menu, which is called the group policy management. Now, if you have a standalone server, this will be local security policy that will be there in the local servers. And it is there in the desktops also, which is Windows 10 or Windows 8, 8.1. But when you have the domain controller, instead of the local security policy, you will get the group policy management. So this is the snap-in which you can use to configure a lot of policies for the entire domain. So the domain that we will configure, it will basically contain a lot of systems, and now these systems, when they become part of the domain, you can use group policies, and there are hundreds of policies that you can apply. Something like there can be the password policy, there can be a software installation policy, so you can restrict certain software to be installed on all systems. And there are a lot of other things that you can do. You can rename the administrator account on all the machines, or you can rename the guest account on all these machines. So a lot of things that you can do using group policy. So we are going to wait, and we are going to basically have a look at it later on. But before that, we are just waiting for the installation to get completed. It should take a few minutes before it gets completed. And once we do this, then we will have to basically go back and use the server manager to configure the Active Directory, because this is just the basic installation that is happening at this point. So let's hopefully this gets completed. Let's hope for that, that it gets completed as soon as possible. So we are just waiting. Even though I can still go ahead and close this particular wizard, and Active Directory installation will run in the back end. But let's just wait and watch and see what happens at the end of the installation. So on the server manager, you would get a notification which you will have to basically use to configure the Active Directory. You have to set up the root root domain name, and you have to configure various other options that relate to the domains that you are configuring. So we'll have to just go ahead and wait for all this. Come on. So we are pretty much about 3 minutes into this installation, and it is still going on. So what I've done is, whenever you are setting up a virtual machine, you should assign the whatever maximum amount of memory. So for this particular virtual machine, I've assigned about 3 gigabytes of memory so that the installation can be fast. So if I reduce the memory, obviously the system will slow down, or rather the virtual machine will slow down, and it will take more time. And that is the reason you should try to increase the memory while you are doing the installation. Let's see what happens after this installation. So this is about 4 minutes into the installation, and it should take about another 1 minute or 2 minutes, and then it should get over. And after that, we will look at various things like how to configure the DNS server also, and then eventually we'll have to basically look at how to configure the DNS server to be used within this particular domain controller. So we'll make that the primary DNS server. All right. So the installation is over now. It says configuration required. Installation succeeded on Ohio-DC1. So there you go. This is what I was saying. You'll get a notification. So all I need to do is now, first I need to promote this server to a domain controller. So let's just click on that particular option. Now what I need to do is, basically there are various options. So by default, it assumes that there is an existing domain which we don't have. So we'll have to create a new forest. So the way it goes is, there is a forest, then there are domains, then there are subdomains, then there are OUs. So there is a complete hierarchy. It's just like a complete forest. In the forest, you have the trees, and then you have the branches. Similarly, Active Directory also follows the same format. So I'm going to name this root domain as, let's write it.local. And then click on next. So now this is where things get pretty tricky, because what you have is the domain and the forest functional levels. Now, if you click on any of these, you will find that there are certain operating systems that are listed, which are the Windows servers, basically Windows Server 2008, 2008 R2, 2012, 2012 R2, 2016. And by default, both the forest and the forest and the domain functional level are set at 2016. Now, basically, when you have the domain functional levels, they enable features that affect the entire domain. And it also affects what kind of operating systems or Windows Server operating system that can be run as the domain controller. So if you set it up to, let's say, 2008, then you cannot run any operating system or any Windows Server 2000 server which is higher than 2008. So it is always advisable to run it at like this, which is the latest version, so that you can also run the older versions of Windows Server. So I am going to just provide a password here. All right. So this is the directory services restore mode DSRM password. Now, in case you need to restore the Active Directory, this is the password you will be prompted to provide. So therefore, we need to provide that password and confirm it, and then click on next. All right. So we are going to just leave this option as is on the DNS options page and move to next. And then we have to provide the NetBIOS name. All right, so let's just go ahead and do that. So there is some configuration going on. All right, so it automatically picks up the NetBIOS domain name. Let's write IT. All right, so this is where it will store the Active Directory database, the log files, and the sys volume. So we are going to just keep the default paths and click on next. All right, so now we are supposed to review the options and click on next. All right, so it's going to verify the prerequisites for domain controller operations. It should take a few minutes. All right, so I'm going to just go ahead and click on install. We'll ignore the results for the time being. And all right, so it should do the installation. So it's starting the installation of Active Directory. Then it is checking if Group Policy Management Console needs to be installed. And then it is configuring the directory partition. So it should take a few minutes before it completes the installation of Active Directory, or rather the configuration of Active Directory. All right, so it's done and you are about to be signed out, because this has been converted into a domain controller and Active Directory has been installed. So I need to restart this particular system. So I'm going to just go ahead and restart and click on close. So now the restarting process is taking place. So it should take about a minute or so to restart this particular server. So let me just click close this notification. So since the system is now starting, there is some notification about the mouse pointer integration. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this. So this is something that I find little funny with VirtualBox, because it keeps on throwing these notifications one after the other, and it becomes quite irritating sometimes. But what to do? So we are just going to continue closing it as the notifications appear. All right, so now, because it is configuring the Active Directory for the first time, that is the reason it is taking a little while. It needs to set up everything in the background. So once this is done, and again, if you reboot your server, it should not take this much time. It should be pretty quick in rebooting. But because after the Active Directory installation and configuration, this is the first reboot. That's why it's taking a couple of minutes to sort of configure the system accordingly, so that it can be converted into a domain controller, and Active Directory could be configured for the domain called Let's Write IT. Now it should come up. All right. So we get to see the graphical interface now, and it's applying the security policy to the system. And now it should give us the prompt to log in pretty soon. So there you go. So what I do is I press Control Home, and then I need to invoke the Control Alt Del. All right, so notice that the domain name is now prefixed with the administrator name. So I am going to just provide the password, and it is going to let me log in. And then we are going to basically look at the Server Manager Tools menu. So we'll see that a lot of new options have been added into this particular window. Come on. All right. So what I need to do is basically wait for some 10 more seconds so that Windows is sort of, settled down and it's configured. Right now it is still configuring. So I'm going to click on Start Charm and then select Server Manager. So Server Manager starts, or rather it is starting up. All right. So there you go. So basically there is a new tool called Windows Admin Center which is there. So what it says is basically you should download that and install it to manage your servers. All right. So we are going to look at the tools menu and look at it. Now there are a lot of Active Directory related stuff. So all right, so we need to basically go ahead and look at the DNS server. So I'm going to just click on DNS from the tools menu, and all right, so let's expand this. Notice that there is a forward lookup zone. Now if I go to the reverse lookup zone, there is no reverse lookup zone. So what I need to do is create a new zone under this so that the IP to domain name or IP to domain name resolution can happen. So I'm going to set up as the primary zone, and this is fine. To all DNS servers within the domain called, let's write it.local, and it is a IPv4 reverse lookup zone, and I need to provide the first 3 octets of the IP address. All right, so allow secure dynamic updates only, that is fine, and I click finish. Now look at it. So there is, all right, so this is what we have. So there is Ohio DC. So let's click on this particular record in the forward lookup zone, and I say update associated pointer or the PTR records. I click OK. I come to this particular reverse lookup zone. I say refresh, and look at it. So there is a IP address to that particular system name resolution pointer has been created. So this is what it is. So now this is what you have done in configuring the DNS. So basically you have set up a reverse lookup zone for the forward lookup zone, which is the let's write it.local. So I'm going to go ahead and close this DNS server. So I'm going to just go ahead and close this, close the server manager. And then now let's see the IP configuration. Look at it. A new DNS server has been added, 127.0.0.1. So this is the loopback address of this particular system, which is the domain controller. So it has automatically updated the DNS server. So that is ideally what it should happen. So before this particular domain controller goes out anywhere to any other DNS server, and of course you can add more DNS servers. This is the primary DNS server. You can add the secondary DNS servers. But before this particular server goes out to any DNS server, it will first try to resolve or do the domain name resolution in its own DNS server, which is now running on its own IP address, which is 192.168.10.100, or it is also having a loopback address, which is 127.0.0.1. Now what happens is, the reason it is using the loopback address is, what if you change this particular address? In that case, the DNS server will no longer work for this particular domain controller. It will have issues in resolving names. Therefore, it is always safer to put the loopback address, because this loopback address is dedicated to this particular system. In fact, every system that you install, whether it's a standalone, part of the domain, part of the work group, it always has a loopback address. So therefore, this particular loopback address will never change. Okay, so we have verified the DNS configuration. In fact, we did not have to update it manually. It got updated automatically. So let's clear the screen. And now what we are going to do is basically see how the name resolution happens. So we are going to type nslookup, let's write it.local. So there you go. It is able to resolve it to the IP address. Let's do the reverse. And there you go. It's again able to resolve to the domain and the domain controller, which has this particular IP address. So this means our DNS is also working fine. This means our domain has been set up properly. And now, just to reiterate what we have done in this particular video, we set up the Active Directory. We basically did the installation first, then we configured it. We also configured the domain controller. Within that, we also set up the DNS server, and within DNS server, we created a reverse lookup zone so that the IP address to domain name resolution can happen. And then we at the end basically verified the DNS server updation in the IPv4 configuration. And then we did the nslookup command with the domain name and the IP address. Now, having this video is now complete, and I hope you did enjoy this video, and have a good day.